A millionaire forced the cleaner to attend a party in his luxury mansion with the intention of humiliating her. However, when she arrived accompanied, all the guests were left speechless. Darlene carefully wiped the marble floors of Everett Shaw's mansion, her hands gliding over the smooth, cold surface that reflected every chandelier's glow above. She'd learned over the years to blend into the background, to move soundlessly in her work, making herself almost invisible to the eyes that refused to see her. It was a skill, one honed by necessity, as the rich and powerful who drifted in and out of the Shaw mansion preferred their comfort undisturbed. But no one reminded her of her place more than Everett Shaw himself. Everett moved through life with a kind of unspoken entitlement, his gaze hard as stone and always calculating. He never spoke to her directly, never acknowledged her presence beyond a glance that held an almost tangible disdain. She had long ago learned to accept the silent judgment in his eyes, the slight curl of his lip when he passed her in the hallway, the unspoken words, "You are beneath me." Darlene had encountered her share of wealthy employers, each with their quirks, but none had the same cold, almost mechanical detachment Everett wore like a second skin. It was as if kindness was a foreign language to him, one he'd never bothered to learn. The mansion reflected this too, grand, beautiful, yet lifeless. No matter how brightly it sparkled, it felt hollow. Even the few other staff members echoed the sentiment. They knew their employer was a man without warmth, and they kept to their places, careful not to step out of line. As she continued scrubbing the floor, she overheard a few of her co-workers talking near the doorway. "Did you hear about the gala, mister? Shaw is hosting this Friday," one of them whispered with excitement. "Oh, I did. It's supposed to be a huge affair. He's even having the main hall redecorated for it," another responded, her tone full of anticipation. "Only the most elite are invited." Darlene felt a spark of curiosity. She couldn't imagine the mansion filled with anything other than Everett's stiff, cold presence. A grand gala. It seemed so contrary to everything she'd seen of him. Something about the contrast intrigued her, though she knew better than to voice her thoughts. As she finished her task, she caught herself lingering for a moment, wondering what such an event might look like. Just then, she felt Everett's gaze land on her, a sharp weight that broke her out of her reverie. She stood up, trying to gather herself, and met his eyes for a brief, almost electric second. His look of disdain was there, as always, but there was something else. Amusement, perhaps. Curiosity. She couldn't quite tell. "What are you staring at, Darlene?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with that familiar hint of condescension. The question took her by surprise, as he rarely addressed her directly. "Nothing, Mr. Shaw," she said, her voice quiet as she tried to mask her discomfort, but she knew he saw through her, reading her curiosity as easily as if she'd spoken it aloud. "Curious about the gala, are you?" he continued, the slightest smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. Darlene felt her face flush. "It's nothing, sir. I just overheard." Everett chuckled, a low, almost mocking sound. "Well, in that case, I wouldn't want to leave you out." His tone was so coldly ironic that it felt like a slap. "You're invited, Darlene. Come, see what the world of Charleston's elite looks like. Just make sure you dress appropriately." The words dripped with sarcasm, and the gleam in his eye told her everything she needed to know. This was no genuine invitation. It was a setup, a means to humiliate her in a way that only he could find entertaining. Darlene felt a pang of embarrassment, but she kept her gaze steady, refusing to let him see the discomfort beneath her calm expression. "Thank you, sir," she replied simply, lowering her gaze and stepping back to her work. Knowing he expected nothing more from her, Everett didn't bother to respond. He continued down the hall, his footsteps echoing as he disappeared into the mansion's depths. Darlene released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The humiliation still stung, even as she tried to brush it off, but something deeper flickered inside her. A tiny ember of defiance, one she hadn't felt in a long time. That night, as she returned to her modest apartment, Everett's mocking words replayed in her mind. She knew he expected her to either ignore the invitation or show up and face ridicule. He wanted her to be out of place, surrounded by the polished guests in their designer suits and gowns, while she stood out like a sore thumb. It was a game to him, and she was merely a pawn in it. But for the first time, Darlene didn't feel the need to cower in her place. Instead, she felt a strange determination brewing. Why should she let Everett control her self-worth? She worked hard. She was good at what she did, and she had nothing to be ashamed of. With a sigh, Darlene sat by the window, gazing out at the city lights. Maybe, just maybe, it was time she showed Everett that she wasn't the invisible person he thought she was. The next day, Darlene moved through her usual duties with a quiet resolve. Everett's words lingered in her mind. That biting invitation and the smug look on his face. She could almost hear the laughter that would follow if she dared show up. Dressed in her simple clothes, standing among Charleston's elite, the thought alone made her stomach twist. Yet there was something in her that couldn't let go of the idea. She spent the morning scrubbing the mansion's many staircases, each step spotless under her meticulous hand. The other staff members walked by, nodding or offering brief smiles, unaware of the silent storm that brewed within her. Darlene had always prided herself on her resilience, but Everett's words had struck a chord. This wasn't the first time he had acted with arrogance, yet this invitation felt like a challenge she couldn't ignore. Finally, during a brief break, Darlene found herself confiding in Angela, a fellow cleaner who'd been working there almost as long as she had. Angela had always been kind, a steady friend in a world that often seemed indifferent. "You know," Darlene began, her voice low as she glanced around, "Mr. Shaw invited me to the gala. Well, he sort of invited me." Angela raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "Sort of invited you, Darlene? What are you talking about?" Darlene sighed, shaking her head. "It was ironic. I think he wants me to go just so he can make a mockery of me. Show me off as a charity case to his friends, or something equally humiliating." Angela's eyes softened with understanding. "That man, he has no respect for anyone. But I don't know, Darlene. Maybe this is your chance to stand up to him. Show him he doesn't get to decide your worth." The idea took hold in Darlene's mind. It was daring, maybe even foolish, but Angela's words gave her the final push. She made up her mind. She would go to the gala, but on her terms. That evening, as she returned home, Darlene found herself scrolling through her contacts until she reached a name she hadn't thought about in a while: Grant Foster. She hadn't seen Grant in years, not since he'd made it big, rising from a tough past to become a respected businessman. They'd grown up together, helping each other through some of life's darkest moments. If there was anyone who would understand her, it was him. Without overthinking, she pressed the call button. The phone rang a few times before she heard his familiar voice on the other end. "Darlene, is that really you?" Grant sounded both surprised and delighted. "Yes, it's me," she replied, the tension in her shoulders easing at the sound of his voice. "I know it's been a while, but I was hoping I could ask you a favor." "Of course," he said without hesitation. "What do you need?" Darlene hesitated, unsure of how to explain the situation without sounding absurd. But as she took a deep breath, she told him about Everett's invitation, the way he had belittled her, and her decision to attend. By the time she finished, she was certain Grant would tell her it was a bad idea, that facing Everett's crowd wasn't worth it. Instead, he surprised her with a soft laugh. "Darlene, you've always been braver than you think. If you're going to that party, then I'm coming with you. We'll make sure Everett Shaw regrets ever trying to humiliate you." Relief washed over her. She hadn't expected him to offer his support so readily. Yet it was like he'd been waiting for a chance to help. They made plans to meet the next day so they could prepare, and as she hung up, Darlene felt the first stirrings of confidence take root. The following day, Grant arrived in a sleek car, stepping out with a presence that could command any room. Though he was dressed casually, he exuded a quiet strength, a reminder of everything he'd overcome to reach where he was now. Darlene greeted him with a mixture of gratitude and excitement. "Grant, I can't thank you enough for this," she said, feeling a little more self-assured with him by her side. He waved her thanks away, smiling. "This is what friends are for. Now, let's get you ready for that gala." They spent the afternoon visiting a boutique Grant had recommended, its interior lined with elegant gowns and polished mirrors. Darlene tried to focus, but each dress felt more extravagant than the last. Finally, Grant picked up a gown of deep emerald green, its fabric soft yet striking, with subtle details that highlighted its beauty. "Try this one," he said, a glint of pride in his eyes. "Trust me, Darlene stepped into the dressing room, feeling an unfamiliar mix of anticipation and nervousness. As she slipped into the dress and adjusted the fabric, she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. The gown transformed her, accentuating her grace and hiding the weariness that often marked her face. She felt beautiful, confident, a world away from the modest cleaner in Everett Shaw's mansion. She stepped out to find Grant waiting, his expression softening with admiration. "Darlene, you look incredible," he said, his voice full of genuine pride. Everett Shaw won't know what hit him. A small, self-conscious smile tugged at her lips. "Thank you, Grant. I couldn't have done this without you." They spent the rest of the evening preparing. From finding the perfect shoes to choosing simple yet elegant accessories, Darlene felt each detail adding to her courage. By the time they returned to her apartment, she felt like she was stepping into a role she'd never known she was meant for. As they parted, Grant squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I'll be there with you, Darlene, whatever happens. Remember that you have every right to be in that room." When she was finally alone, Darlene felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: anticipation, fear, excitement. She had no idea what would happen at the gala, but she knew one thing: she was done being invisible. The day of the gala arrived with a mix of nerves and excitement that made Darlene's hands tremble. She spent the morning at the mansion, finishing her shift as if it were any other day. As she polished the ornate fixtures and wiped down the chandeliers in preparation for the evening's event, she noticed the other staff glancing her way with curious looks. Having caught whispers of her unexpected invitation, she could feel their silent judgment, but kept her head high, unwilling to let them see her doubt. As the clock inched closer to evening, Darlene wrapped up her work and returned home to get ready. She took her time with each step, carefully styling her hair and applying makeup that Grant had encouraged her to wear. It was minimal, just enough to accentuate her features without masking her natural self. Her hands lingered over the emerald dress, feeling the soft fabric beneath her fingers as she slipped it on, savoring the way it transformed her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked both familiar and like a stranger, a stronger, more confident version of herself. Soon, a knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Grant, looking every bit as impressive as the day before, dressed in a classic black suit that suited his frame. He gave her a warm smile that instantly put her at ease. "Darlene," he breathed, his eyes shining with admiration. "You look absolutely stunning." She felt a flush creep over her cheeks, but smiled in return. "Thank you, Grant. I still can't believe I'm doing this." He offered his arm with a reassuring nod. "You're more than ready. Let's show them who you really are." The drive to Everett's mansion was quiet, but the silence between them was comfortable. Grant held her hand, his calm presence settling her nerves. She watched the city lights flash by, each one a reminder of the life she'd worked so hard to build. And now, here she was, heading into the heart of a world that had never cared to acknowledge her. As they arrived at the mansion, Darlene felt the weight of the night ahead press down on her, but she kept her chin up, focusing on Grant's steady presence beside her. Together, they stepped out of the car, and all eyes turned to them as they entered the grand hall. The air was thick with the scent of expensive colognes and perfumes. Mingling with the light melody of a string quartet, she could feel the stares from every corner of the room, and she braced herself, willing her heart to stay steady. The opulence of the ballroom almost felt surreal. The chandeliers overhead sparkled with a brilliance she had only seen from below, and the gold-accented decor shimmered under the soft glow of the candles. She moved through the room as if in a dream, her senses alive with every detail she had once only glimpsed as a background figure. For the first time, she was on equal footing, not blending into the shadows, but taking her place as a guest. Everett Shaw's gaze found her almost immediately, his expression freezing in shock before shifting to something colder, sharper. She felt the impact of his stare, but held her head high, refusing to let him see any hint of her uncertainty. Grant's hand on her arm grounded her, and together, they walked through the crowd, murmurs following them as people recognized Grant and whispered about the striking woman by his side. The other guests regarded her with a mix of curiosity and surprise, their eyes sweeping over her in silent judgment. But it was Grant's presence that protected her from the worst of it. He greeted old acquaintances with warmth, introducing her with a pride that left no room for doubt. Each time he spoke her name, Darlene felt a bit of her confidence grow, the barrier of class and wealth dissolving around her. In a quiet corner, Grant leaned in, his voice soft and steady. "Are you all right?" Darlene gave a small nod, her grip tightening on his arm. I think I'm okay. Thank you, Grant. I never could have done this alone." "You're not alone," he replied, his tone firm. "And you deserve to be here just as much as anyone else." Just as her nerves began to settle, Everett approached, his expression carefully masked, but Darlene could sense the disdain lingering beneath. He offered a thin smile, one that held no warmth. "Grant Foster," he said, his tone polite yet dismissive. "I didn't realize you'd be attending." And with such an unexpected guest, Grant met his gaze without flinching, his smile unfaltering. "Good evening, Everett." "Yes. Darlene and I have been friends for quite some time." Everett's gaze slid back to Darlene, his eyes narrowing as he studied her appearance. She held his stare, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her intimidated. She could feel the weight of his judgment pressing on her, but she forced herself to stay calm, drawing strength from Grant's steady presence beside her. "So, Darlene," Everett began, his voice smooth but edged with mockery, "enjoying the view from the other side. Quite the change from your usual perspective, isn't it?" Darlene felt the sting of his words, but she kept her expression neutral. She wanted to reply, to show him that she wasn't the weak, invisible woman he thought she was. Before she could speak, however, Grant intervened, his tone as cold as Everett's. "I think Darlene's perspective is something you couldn't possibly understand, Everett," he said, his voice unwavering. "She's someone who's earned every bit of respect she receives. Unlike those who believe respect is a birthright." Everett's face hardened, but he gave a forced laugh, as if brushing off the comment. "Interesting perspective, Grant," he said, his eyes never leaving Darlene. "I suppose everyone has their place in this world." Grant's hand tightened on her arm. "Indeed, and Darlene's place is exactly where she chooses to stand, just as mine is, beside her." Everett's smile faded, his eyes flashing with something unreadable. Before he stepped back, conceding the conversation, he melted back into the crowd, but not without one last withering glance in Darlene's direction. As he disappeared, Darlene released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Grant looked down at her, a reassuring smile softening his gaze. "You handled that perfectly," he murmured, his voice filled with pride. Darlene managed a small smile in return. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." "Grant," they continued through the evening, Grant never once leaving her side, his presence a steadying force that kept her from slipping back into doubt. She felt something in her shift, a sense of belonging that had been absent for so long, like a part of her had been hidden away, waiting for this moment. For the first time, she felt seen. As the evening wore on, Darlene settled into her role as a guest in Everett Shaw's mansion, the very place she'd spent countless hours cleaning and maintaining in near silence. Now, she moved through the gilded rooms with Grant at her side, feeling every stare, every glance exchanged as she passed. It was as if she had stepped into a world where she'd always belonged, but had been shut out of, invisible until tonight. The weight of each moment held her in a kind of awe, but it also lit a fire inside her, a sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. Grant seemed to sense her every thought. He maintained a steady, supportive presence beside her, but he made it a point to introduce her to a few key people: a renowned gallery owner, a philanthropist, and a businesswoman with a keen eye for talent. To each of them, he spoke of Darlene as if she were someone of remarkable value, and each time he did, Darlene felt herself grow a little taller, the nervous flutter in her stomach easing into calm confidence. Eventually, they found themselves near a group of Everett's most prominent guests, laughing and trading tales of Charleston's social scene. Darlene observed quietly, smiling when appropriate, but mostly content to watch the interactions, learning more about these people than she'd ever known from her perspective as a housekeeper. As she listened, she noticed Everett himself glancing over every so often, his expression one of quiet annoyance. It wasn't long before he joined their small circle, bringing his signature aura of arrogance with him. "Grant, I'm impressed," Everett began, his voice smooth but edged with something sharper. "You've certainly turned heads tonight. Darlene looks transformed." Grant gave him a tight smile, his eyes cool. She's only showing what's always been there. Everett. Sometimes people just need a reason to reveal their true selves. Everett's gaze turned to Darlene, his eyes narrowing. True selves indeed, he replied, his tone just as cutting. But sometimes, isn't it wiser for people to know their place? The words struck Darlene like a slap, but she held herself steady, her expression calm. She could feel Grant tense beside her, ready to jump in, but she gave him a subtle nod, silently telling him she could handle it. With a slight smile, Darlene met Everett's gaze head-on. "I believe people define their own place, Mr. Shaw," she said evenly. "Sometimes, it just takes a little courage to step into it." A flicker of surprise crossed Everett's face, quickly masked by his usual air of superiority. Before he could respond, Grant intervened smoothly, redirecting the conversation to a less charged topic. But the message was clear. Darlene was no longer the invisible figure he could easily dismiss. They moved through the rest of the evening with a quiet confidence, mingling with guests who were now openly curious about Darlene, intrigued by her poised demeanor and the effortless way she fit into the scene. Grant never left her side, occasionally leaning in to share a word of encouragement, his pride in her evident. Finally, they reached a quieter corner of the room, where the music softened and the chatter faded into a low hum. Darlene took a deep breath, grateful for the moment of respite, and turned to Grant, her expression a mix of gratitude and wonder. "I still can't believe I'm here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant smiled, his gaze warm. "I can. You've always had this strength in you, Darlene. You just needed the right moment to show it." Her heart swelled at his words, and for the first time, she allowed herself to really believe them. For too long, she had let people like Everett dictate her worth, but tonight had shown her a different side of herself, one that could hold her head high, even in a room full of people who'd once ignored her. Just then, one of Everett's closest friends, a man named Charles Worthington, approached them with a broad smile and an extended hand. Charles was a man of influence, known for his philanthropic work, and his reputation as one of the more grounded members of Charleston's elite. "Darlene, is it?" he asked, his tone warm and genuine. "Grant has been singing your praises all night. I'd love to hear more about you, what you do, where you're from." Darlene hesitated, feeling the weight of his interest, but Grant gave her a reassuring nod. She began speaking, telling Charles a little about her background, her work, and the life she'd carved out for herself. She kept her words simple, but each one held a quiet dignity that Charles seemed to appreciate. By the time she finished, he was nodding, his eyes thoughtful. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet someone as resilient as you," he said, his voice sincere. "Too often, people in our circles forget the value of hard work and integrity. You're a breath of fresh air, Darlene." She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of pride and gratitude. Charles excused himself to join another group, but not before giving her a final nod of approval, one that left no doubt about his respect for her. Grant turned to her, his expression filled with pride. "See, you belong here, Darlene. More than most of them." They continued to mingle, with more guests approaching, curious about her connection to Grant and her poised presence in the room. Each interaction strengthened her, erasing any lingering doubts and replacing them with a quiet confidence. She was finally beginning to feel comfortable in her own skin, no longer concerned with the whispers or judgment around her. Then, just as the evening seemed to be winding down, Everett returned, his expression darker than before. He held a glass of champagne, his eyes fixed on Darlene with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Quite the performance tonight, Darlene," he said, his voice low and controlled. "But let's not forget, appearances can be deceiving." The words hung in the air, a reminder of his disdain, but Darlene merely gave him a small, composed smile. "Appearances don't make the person, Mr. Shaw," she replied, her voice steady. "It's what's inside that counts." Everett's lips tightened, his gaze hardening, but before he could respond, Grant stepped forward, his hand resting protectively on Darlene's shoulder. "Everett, I think you've made your point," Grant said, his tone firm but calm. "Darlene doesn't need to prove anything to you. She's here as my guest, and she deserves the same respect as anyone in this room." Everett's jaw clenched, but he held his tongue, clearly taken aback by Grant's unwavering stance. He glanced between them, as if weighing his options, before finally giving a curt nod and retreating into the crowd. As he disappeared, Darlene felt a wave of relief, mixed with a newfound strength. She realized she didn't need Everett's approval or anyone else's. She had finally found her place, and for the first time, it was one of her own making. The night of the gala had already left an indelible mark on Darlene, but as she moved through the crowd, she became more aware of just how profound the impact of her presence was. With every step, she felt the eyes of Charleston's elite following her, each glance a mix of curiosity, intrigue, and even admiration. It was a feeling she'd never known before, but it empowered her, giving her the strength to keep her head high. Grant's steady hand on her arm reminded her of his unwavering support, and for that, she was deeply grateful. It was his belief in her that had gotten her here, and it was his quiet confidence that kept her grounded. As they moved further into the grand hall, the murmurs grew louder. She could hear fragments of conversations, whispers exchanged as they passed. "Isn't she Mr. Shaw's housekeeper? Grant Foster's with her. They look amazing together. Did you see the look on Everett's face?" Each comment stung Everett's pride more, and Darlene could see the growing tension in his posture, his gaze flitting back to her more frequently. But Everett wasn't the only one watching her. Others, like Charles Worthington, who had shown genuine kindness earlier, came over to greet her, offering words of encouragement and admiration for her poise. At one point, the crowd parted, allowing Everett a clear view of her. He stood near the center of the room, surrounded by guests, but his focus was singularly fixed on her. His expression was a curious mix of disdain and disbelief, as though he couldn't reconcile the woman standing before him with the quiet housekeeper he'd always dismissed. Everett approached again, his steps deliberate, his face an unreadable mask. Darlene felt her pulse quicken, but she steeled herself, reminding herself of who she was and who she'd become. "Darlene," Everett began, his tone clipped. "You've certainly made quite an impression tonight." She met his gaze with a calmness that surprised even herself. "Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I'm glad you noticed." His mouth twitched, a faint glimmer of annoyance in his eyes. "You're certainly different from what I expected, but tell me, are you comfortable here, among people who don't belong to your world?" The words were laced with condescension, a final attempt to reassert his dominance. Darlene felt the sting but kept her composure, unwilling to let him see her falter. "Mr. Shaw," she replied, her voice steady, "I think the world is big enough for everyone to find their place, don't you?" Everett's jaw clenched, the light in his eyes darkening as he struggled for control. Before he could respond, Grant stepped forward, his gaze hard as he addressed Everett. "Everett, it's a shame that, with all your wealth, you've never learned the true value of respect," he said, his tone cold. "Darlene has earned her place here, just as much as anyone." Everett gave a tight, humorless smile, his gaze flickering between them. "Well, it's easy to feel secure when you have someone like Grant by your side. Isn't it, Darlene?" She held his gaze, refusing to look away. "I have people who believe in me, Mr. Shaw. That's all anyone really needs." Everett's face darkened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he gave her one last withering glance before turning and melting back into the crowd. Darlene exhaled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders as he disappeared from view. The confrontation had been subtle but powerful, a small victory that filled her with newfound strength. As the evening continued, Grant led her through the room, introducing her to more people, each one more welcoming than the last. She felt the walls she'd once built around herself begin to crumble, replaced by a sense of belonging she hadn't known before. Here, among Charleston's elite, she was no longer invisible. Then, as they moved to another part of the hall, a hush fell over the crowd. Darlene looked around, puzzled, until she saw what had drawn everyone's attention. The mayor of Charleston had entered, accompanied by a small entourage. He was a respected figure, known for his charm and commitment to the city. Darlene hadn't expected him to attend, but as he made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging words, she felt a sudden pang of nerves. This was, after all, the highest echelon of society, and her instinct was to step back, to slip into the background. But before she could retreat, the mayor spotted Grant and came over, his face lighting up with recognition. Grant Foster, he greeted warmly, shaking Grant's hand. It's been a while. Grant returned the handshake, his smile easy and genuine. It has, Mayor Hughes. It's good to see you. The mayor's gaze shifted to Darlene, his eyebrows raising in surprise. And who might this be? Grant's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Mayor, I'd like you to meet Darlene. She's a close friend of mine. Darlene felt the weight of the mayor's attention, but she kept her composure, offering a polite smile. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mayor Hughes. The mayor gave her an appraising look, his expression thoughtful. The pleasure is mine, Darlene. Any friend of Grant's is a friend of mine. They spoke briefly, exchanging polite conversation before the mayor was called away by another guest. But as he left, he gave Darlene a nod of respect that filled her with pride. As the evening began winding down, Darlene and Grant found a quieter corner to talk. Away from the crowd, she looked at him, her heart brimming with gratitude. Grant, I don't know how to thank you, she began, her voice thick with emotion. Tonight, I never imagined I could feel like this, like I finally belong. He smiled, his gaze soft. Darlene, you've always belonged. You just needed a chance to show it. I'm just glad I could be here to see it. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the buzz of the party fading into the background. Darlene felt an unfamiliar sense of peace, a contentment that filled her completely. This night had been a turning point, a moment she would carry with her forever. Then, as she looked around the grand hall, taking in the laughter and the glittering lights, she caught sight of Everett. He stood alone, watching her from across the room, his face a mask of barely concealed bitterness. It was clear that her presence had shaken him, that the carefully constructed world he'd built around himself had been disturbed by the one person he'd never considered important. Darlene met his gaze, her expression calm. She felt no need to confront him again, no desire to challenge him further. She had won her victory, and it was more meaningful than any retort or insult. For the first time, she saw Everett not as a figure of power, but as a man consumed by his own insecurities, trapped by the walls he'd built around himself. With a final, silent nod, Darlene turned away, walking with Grant toward the exit. The night had come full circle, and she left the mansion not as the quiet, overlooked housekeeper, but as a woman who had claimed her place in a world that had once dismissed her. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Darlene felt a deep sense of relief. The gala, the grandeur, the looks, all of it had only strengthened her resolve. She had faced her fears, met Everett Shaw's arrogance head-on, and emerged with her dignity intact. She smiled up at Grant, her heart light. Thank you, Grant, for everything. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. You don't need to thank me, Darlene. This was all you. And in that moment, as they walked into the night, Darlene felt truly, irrevocably free. The days following the gala were surreal for Darlene. Each moment of that night echoed in her mind. The whispers of admiration, the gentle nods of respect, and, above all, the silent acknowledgement from Everett Shaw. It was as if the power dynamics had shifted subtly, and Darlene felt a new strength, a quiet confidence she hadn't known she could possess when she returned to work in the mansion. The staff seemed different too. There were knowing smiles from a few, whispers she caught as she passed by. It was clear that her transformation at the gala had made waves not just among the guests, but within the walls of the Shaw estate. The household staff regarded her with a new sense of respect, some even daring to offer nods and words of encouragement as she resumed her duties. As she moved through the corridors, Darlene spotted Everett speaking with one of his business associates in the main hall. He wore his usual look of detached composure, his expression one of practiced disinterest. But when his gaze found hers, she caught a brief flicker of something. An emotion she could only guess was frustration. He quickly looked away, resuming his conversation, but the moment lingered, the silent tension between them thickening. For the next few days, Darlene continued her work, noting the subtle changes in Everett's behavior. He seemed to go out of his way to avoid her gaze, his presence more distant, almost aloof. Yet, there were moments when she could feel his eyes on her, as if he were constantly reminded of her quiet defiance, her unshakable dignity. One afternoon, as she finished cleaning the grand staircase, Everett approached her, His steps were measured, his posture controlled, but she could sense a subtle tension in the air. "Darlene?" he began, his tone polite but laced with a faint edge. "I trust you enjoyed yourself at the gala." She met his gaze evenly, determined to remain composed. "Yes, Mr. Shaw, it was a lovely evening." He gave a thin smile, his eyes narrowing. "I must admit, you surprised me. Not many would have the courage to step into a room like that, especially with no experience of that world." Darlene held her ground, refusing to let his words unnerve her. "Sometimes, Mr. Shaw, people surprise you when you least expect it. I think the world has room for all of us, don't you?" Everett's smile faded, and for a moment, a shadow crossed his face. "Perhaps," he replied, his tone colder, "but some worlds aren't meant to mix. I hope you don't get too comfortable in places you don't belong." The words stung, each one a reminder of his disdain. But Darlene kept her composure. She knew better now than to let his words define her worth. "I'm comfortable wherever I am," she replied calmly. "I learned long ago that respect is something you carry within yourself. No one else can take it from you." For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension between them thick and palpable. Everett's jaw tightened, his expression hardening, but he said nothing. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps brisk, as though escaping something he couldn't quite face. Darlene watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. She had won this small confrontation, but it left a bitter taste, a reminder of the deep divide between them. Everett's world was one of rigid boundaries, of walls built to keep people in their places. She had seen beyond those walls, glimpsed a life where she was valued for who she was, not for her station. Later that evening, as she left the mansion, Darlene's thoughts returned to Grant. His unwavering support, his belief in her, had given her the courage to face Everett with dignity. She wondered if she would have ever found that strength on her own, or if it was Grant's presence in her life that had awakened something new in her. As if on cue, her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from him. "Dinner tomorrow. There's a new place I think you'd love." A smile spread across her face. She quickly replied, accepting his invitation, and felt a warmth bloom in her chest. She hadn't allowed herself to hope for anything beyond their friendship. But there was something undeniable growing between them, a connection that had deepened since the gala. The next evening, Darlene met Grant at the cozy restaurant he'd mentioned, a place with warm lighting, rustic charm, and a relaxed atmosphere that felt miles away from the grandeur of Everett's mansion. Grant greeted her with a smile, his eyes lighting up as she approached. "Darlene," he said warmly, pulling out her chair. "You look radiant." "Thank you, Grant. This place is lovely," she replied, glancing around at the inviting decor. They settled in, ordering their meals and talking easily, laughter punctuating their conversation. It felt natural, a comfortable rhythm between them that erased any lingering doubts from the past. As they shared stories, Darlene found herself opening up more than she had in years, speaking of her dreams, her fears, and the life she'd built piece by piece, piece by. At one point, Grant reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Darlene, you don't have to explain yourself to anyone, especially not someone like Everett Shaw. You have a strength that most people only dream of." She felt her cheeks warm, his words settling deep within her. "Thank you, Grant, for everything. I don't think I'd have had the courage to face him without you." He shook his head, his gaze steady. "Darlene, that courage was always there. I just helped you see it." They continued talking, the conversation flowing easily, each word bringing them closer. By the time they finished their meal, Darlene felt a sense of clarity, a newfound confidence in who she was and the life she was building. As they walked out into the cool evening air, Grant slipped his arm around her, pulling her close. The city lights shimmered above, casting a gentle glow over the street, and for a moment, everything felt right. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone, least of all Everett Shaw. She was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by people who valued her for who she truly was. That night, as Darlene returned home, she felt a peace settle over her. She'd faced the judgment, the condescension, and the silent battles with Everett, and had emerged unscathed. She was done being invisible, done allowing others to dictate her worth. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but she knew she had the strength to face whatever came her way. The following day, Darlene moved through her routine at the mansion with a renewed sense of calm. Her quiet confidence had taken root, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. As she cleaned, she noticed the lingering glances from other staff members, the whispers that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But this time, the looks didn't make her feel small. Instead, she felt a subtle sense of pride, a reminder that she'd stepped out of the shadows and claimed her place. That evening, after finishing her shift, Darlene found herself thinking about Grant. The dinner they'd shared had left her with a warmth that lingered, a quiet joy that seemed to wrap around her like a soft blanket. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed having someone who saw her, truly saw her, beyond the uniform and the quiet life she led. With Grant, she felt understood, respected, feelings that had often seemed out of reach, as if on cue. Her phone buzzed with a message from him. "Meet me at the cafe down the street if you're free. There's something I want to tell you." Curiosity piqued. Darlene slipped out of the mansion, her steps quickening as she made her way to the small cafe Grant had mentioned. The place was cozy, with warm lighting that cast a golden glow over the tables. She spotted Grant in a corner booth, his expression thoughtful as he sipped his coffee. He looked up as she approached, a smile breaking across his face. "Darlene, thanks for coming." "Of course," she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. "You sounded serious. Is everything all right?" Grant chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm fine. There's just something I think you should know." He paused, his gaze shifting to the window as if gathering his thoughts. Darlene felt a flicker of concern. "What is it, Grant?" He took a deep breath, his voice steady but soft. "You know, Darlene, I haven't always had this life. In fact, I grew up with almost nothing. My parents struggled, and by the time I was old enough to understand, we'd lost nearly everything. I was just a kid on the streets trying to survive." She listened in silence, surprised by the openness in his voice. She'd known Grant had overcome hardships, but she hadn't realized the extent. "Back then, I didn't have anyone," he continued, his gaze still fixed on the window. "But one day I met someone, a girl who had barely enough herself but never hesitated to share what little she had. She taught me about resilience, about kindness. Her name was Darlene." Darlene's breath caught, memories of her own struggles surfacing, hazy images of a young boy who'd become her friend during those difficult years. "You mean, that was you?" Grant nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "I never forgot you, Darlene. You were the first person to show me that there was still good in the world, and when I finally found my footing, I promised myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd find you and thank you." Emotion tightened her throat as she remembered the boy she'd known, the friend she'd lost touch with but never forgotten. She had no idea that he'd grown into the man sitting before her, the man who'd come back into her life when she needed him most. "I can't believe it," she murmured, a small smile breaking through the surprise. "All these years and I had no idea." Grant reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Darlene, you saved me back then, and when I saw how Everett treated you, how he made you feel invisible, I couldn't stand by and let it happen. You deserved to be seen, to be valued for the incredible person you are." She felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of his words. She hadn't realized how much her small acts of kindness had meant to him, hadn't thought that they'd left a mark that would one day return to her in this way. "Thank you, Grant," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." He squeezed her hand, his smile warm. "You don't have to say anything. Darlene, just know that you'll always have a friend in me. I'm here, no matter what." They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thought as they held hands across the table. The cafe around them buzzed with quiet conversation. But for Darlene, the world had narrowed to this moment, this connection that had bridged the years and brought them back together. Eventually, Grant broke the silence, his tone lighter. "You know, the people at the gala, they're probably still talking about you, about the woman who walked in with the confidence of a queen." Darlene laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I doubt that, but it felt good, just for one night, to be seen." "You should feel that way every day," Grant replied, his gaze steady. "You're worth more than the world has ever given you credit for, Darlene. And if there's one thing I can promise, it's that I'll make sure you never forget it." They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing stories of their pasts, the paths that had led them to this moment. Darlene felt the warmth of their friendship settle around her, a feeling of safety and belonging that she hadn't known she'd been missing. As they left the cafe, the night air cool against her skin, Darlene felt a weight lift. She wasn't alone anymore, and she knew that whatever lay ahead, she had someone by her side who truly understood her. Just as they were about to part, Grant hesitated, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "Darlene, would you consider going to dinner with me again sometime? Something more than just two old friends catching up." Darlene felt her heart skip a beat, warmth blooming in her chest. "I'd like that, Grant. I'd like that very much." They shared a quiet smile before saying their goodbyes, and as Darlene walked home, she felt a sense of peace, of hope for the future. This unexpected reunion had brought her more than just an old friend. It had given her a new beginning, a chance to rewrite her story with someone who truly valued her. The night felt alive with possibility, each step lighter than the last. Returning to the Shaw mansion the next day, Darlene carried an undeniable sense of warmth and belonging. The evening she'd shared with Grant left a glow that lingered, an affirmation that her life was moving in a new direction. For the first time, she felt ready to let go of the shadows of her past and embrace a future that held promise. She hadn't just rediscovered an old friend. She had reconnected with herself, the part of her that was strong, resilient, and ready to be seen. As she moved through her tasks, she became aware of Everett's presence nearby. He stood at the end of the hall, watching her with an expression that seemed out of place, a strange mixture of contemplation and something else she couldn't quite decipher. It was a look she'd never seen on him before, and it unsettled her. Everett was usually so composed, his gaze hard and judgmental. But today, his demeanor had shifted, his eyes softer, almost distant. He didn't say anything as she passed, yet she felt his gaze lingering, as if he were on the verge of saying something. She kept her head down, focusing on her work, unwilling to break the silence. But later that day, as she cleaned the main dining room, Everett appeared again. This time, he didn't just observe from afar. He approached her, his steps slow and measured. Darlene straightened, bracing herself for whatever was coming. She expected a reprimand or some veiled insult, but instead, Everett's expression was pensive, almost hesitant. "Darlene?" he began, his voice quieter than usual. "Do you have a moment?" Caught off guard, she nodded, unsure of what to expect. "Of course, Mr. Shaw." Everett's gaze drifted to the large bay window, where the afternoon light cast a warm glow over the room. He seemed lost in thought, his usual cold exterior softened by something she couldn't quite name. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, the words sounding foreign on his tongue, "for how I've treated you. The way I behaved at the gala, it was uncalled for." Darlene's breath caught, surprise flickering across her face. An apology was the last thing she'd ever expected from Everett Shaw. She had known him only as a man of pride and arrogance, someone who wielded his power with indifference. This glimpse of vulnerability left her at a loss. "Thank you, Mr. Shaw," she replied, her voice steady but cautious. "I appreciate that." He gave a small nod, his gaze distant. "You surprised me, Darlene. I'd always assumed, well, I'd never thought someone like you could have such an impact." His tone softened. And for a moment, he seemed almost human, stripped of the armor he usually wore. Darlene held his gaze, unsure of how to respond. This was a side of Everett she had never seen, a man wrestling with the limits of his own worldview. But she felt no urge to comfort him, no need to lessen his discomfort. Instead, she remained silent, letting him find his own words. "I grew up in a world where appearances meant everything," he continued, his tone reflective, "where people were only as valuable as their status or wealth. I thought I understood the world. But you've shown me something different." The honesty in his voice surprised her, but she kept her expression neutral. She could see the struggle in him, the battle between his old values and this new realization that had shaken his sense of certainty. "Sometimes," she replied gently, "we're all more than we appear to be." Everett nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Yes, I've come to see that. And it's made me question things I once believed to be absolute." He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor as if he couldn't bear to meet her eyes any longer. But it's not easy to let go of something you've believed your entire life. Darlene felt a pang of empathy, but she remained firm, unwilling to let his regret erase the years of mistreatment. Growth rarely is, Mr. Shaw, but sometimes it's necessary. He looked at her then, a trace of something vulnerable in his eyes, a hint of understanding that made her see him in a new light. But even with this shift, she knew that forgiveness would not come easily. There was too much history, too many wounds that his words alone couldn't heal. Everett's face tightened, as though he understood her silence. He straightened, the familiar hardness returning to his gaze. "Well," he said, his voice regaining its usual coolness, "I suppose that's all I wanted to say. Good day, Darlene." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the empty dining room. She watched him go, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. It was strange to think that the man who had once dismissed her as invisible was now grappling with his own sense of inadequacy. Yet, despite the apology, she felt a sense of closure, a quiet satisfaction that she had finally claimed her dignity. That evening, as she left the mansion, Darlene's mind was still on Everett's apology. She replayed the conversation in her head, trying to make sense of it. She knew his words wouldn't undo the past, but they were a start, a small sign that maybe, just maybe, people like Everett could change. Later that night, she met Grant for a quiet dinner, her heart still heavy with the day's revelations. As they settled at the table, she shared the details of her encounter with Everett, her voice hesitant as she relayed the strange mix of vulnerability and pride she had seen in him. Grant listened in silence, his expression thoughtful. People like Everett are a product of their world, Darlene. They're taught from a young age to value wealth and power above all else. It's rare to see someone like him even question that. Darlene nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy. I could see he was struggling. It's as if he wanted to change, but didn't know how. Grant reached across the table, his hand warm on hers. You showed him something he'd never seen, Darlene. You made him face his own shortcomings, and that's no small thing. It's a testament to your strength, your kindness. She felt a wave of emotion rise within her, gratitude mingling with pride. Thank you, Grant. I couldn't have done any of this without you. He smiled, his gaze steady. You had it in you all along, Darlene. I just helped you see it. They continued their meal, the conversation drifting to lighter topics, and Darlene felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had faced Everett, had stood her ground, and had come away with her dignity intact. For the first time in years, she felt truly free from the weight of judgment, from the feeling of invisibility that had once defined her. As they walked out into the cool night, Grant wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Pulling her close, the city lights sparkled above, a gentle reminder of the life she had reclaimed. In that moment, with Grant by her side and the night unfolding around them, Darlene felt an overwhelming sense of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was no longer the invisible woman Everett Shaw had dismissed. She was Darlene, a woman of strength, resilience, and grace, ready to embrace whatever came next. And with Grant beside her, she felt ready to face the world, one step at a time. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to Darlene's life. She continued her work at the mansion, but the weight of Everett's judgment no longer held any power over her. She moved through each room with quiet confidence, greeting her colleagues with warmth and finding satisfaction in her tasks. The old insecurities that had once shadowed her, every move had given way to a sense of freedom that she savored. Then, one afternoon, she received an unexpected invitation. It was from Grant, asking her to join him that evening for a private event at a renowned restaurant downtown. His message was brief, his words careful, but she sensed something special in his tone. Her heart fluttered at the thought, her mind racing with possibilities. When evening came, she dressed carefully, choosing a soft blue dress that Grant had once complimented. It wasn't extravagant, but it made her feel beautiful, and tonight, that was enough. She took a cab to the restaurant, feeling a surge of excitement as she stepped inside. The interior was elegant yet understated, the lighting warm and welcoming. Casting a soft glow over the tables, Grant was waiting for her at a secluded table near the back. As she approached, he rose from his seat, his smile broad and genuine. He looked impeccable, his suit perfectly tailored, but there was a warmth in his eyes that set her at ease. "Darlene," he greeted, pulling out her chair with a gentle hand. "You look stunning." "Thank you," she replied, settling into her seat. "This place is beautiful." He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I wanted tonight to be special." They ordered their meals, sharing easy conversation as they waited, each story and laugh strengthening the bond between them. Darlene felt herself relax completely, basking in the warmth of his presence. It was as though they were in their own world, separate from the expectations and judgments of others. When their food arrived, Grant hesitated, setting his fork aside as he looked at her with an expression of quiet determination. Darlene's heart skipped a beat, sensing that he had something important to say. "Darlene?" he began softly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." She waited, her pulse quickening as he held her gaze. His expression was tender, filled with an emotion that left her breathless. "You've always meant so much to me," he continued, his voice steady. "Even when we lost touch, I never forgot you. And these past few weeks, seeing you again, I've realized just how important you are in my life. You're not just a friend, Darlene. You're the person I want to build my future with." A wave of emotion washed over her, her heart swelling as she took in his words. She had never imagined that he felt the same way, that he had held on to those memories just as she had. Her hand tightened in his, her smile soft as she tried to find the words. "Grant, I feel the same," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You've brought so much light into my life. I never thought I'd find someone who understood me like you do." His smile deepened, a spark of happiness in his eyes. "I'm glad, Darlene, because I want to make sure you know just how much you mean to me." Then, to her astonishment, he rose from his seat. Still holding her hand, the other diners had begun to take notice, their curious gazes settling on them as Grant knelt beside her, his face alight with joy. "Darlene," he began, his voice carrying a quiet strength that silenced the room. "Will you marry me?" Her breath caught, her mind reeling as she took in the scene. She had never dreamed of a moment like this, of a man who would love her so deeply, who would cherish her beyond the roles and limitations others had tried to impose. Her heart raced, a radiant smile spreading across her face as she nodded. "Yes, Grant," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." The room erupted in applause, a chorus of joy that filled the space as Grant rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms. She felt a surge of happiness, her heart soaring as she embraced him, the rest of the world fading away. In that moment, she knew that she had found her place, not in the approval of others, but in the love and respect that Grant had shown her. As they sat back down, holding hands across the table, Darlene felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. She had spent so many years believing she was invisible, that she was destined to remain on the outskirts of life. But now, with Grant by her side, she felt truly seen, valued for the woman she was. The next day, word of their engagement had already begun to spread. The staff at the mansion offered her congratulatory smiles, whispers following her as she moved through the halls. The air seemed lighter, each glance filled with a newfound respect. Even those who had once ignored her couldn't hide their curiosity, their admiration for the woman who had captured Grant Foster's heart. But Darlene knew there was one person who had yet to hear the news: Everett Shaw. She hadn't seen him that morning, but she suspected he'd already heard the whispers, felt the ripple of her newfound happiness as she finished her tasks. She caught sight of him in the main hall, his expression unreadable as he watched her approach. She paused, waiting for him to speak, her heart steady as she met his gaze. "Darlene," he began, his tone unusually quiet. "I hear congratulations are in order." She nodded, a small smile on her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Shaw." Everett's gaze lingered on her, his expression inscrutable. "You've certainly surprised me." Darlene held his gaze, unflinching. "People are often more than they appear to be, Mr. Shaw. I think we all have something worth valuing." For a moment, he said nothing, the silence stretching between them. Then with a slight nod, he stepped back, his face clouded with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Well," he said finally, his voice strained, "I wish you all the best, Darlene." As he turned and walked away, Darlene felt a quiet satisfaction settle within her. She had nothing left to prove, no approval left to seek. She was finally free, her life filled with the promise of love and happiness that she had always believed was out of reach. In that moment, as she watched Everett Shaw disappear down the hall, she knew that she had not only claimed her place in his world, she had transcended it. Her life was her own, shaped by her resilience and courage, and the love of a man who had seen her for the remarkable woman she was. And with Grant by her side, she felt ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that her journey had only just begun. In the days following her engagement, Darlene found herself swept up in a whirlwind of congratulations and well wishes. She moved through her routine with newfound joy, each task imbued with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. The staff at the mansion, who once saw her as just another worker, now greeted her warmly, offering small smiles and words of admiration. It was a welcome change, but one that felt bittersweet. A reminder of how differently she'd been treated before, even with the new respect from her colleagues. Darlene knew that her journey with Everett Shaw wasn't entirely finished. She had often wondered if he would choose to speak with her about the engagement, if he'd continue to hold on to the icy pride that had once defined him, or if he'd see this as a final opportunity to change. Then, one morning, she got her answer. She was in the main hall, arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase. When Everett entered, he paused, observing her with an expression that seemed distant, yet contemplative. After a moment, he cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Darlene," he began, his tone guarded but lacking its usual sharpness. "I wanted to speak with you about everything." She set down the vase carefully, turning to face him. "Of course, Mr. Shaw." He took a slow breath, his gaze drifting to the large windows as if searching for the right words. "I've come to realize that I may have underestimated you my whole life. I've valued wealth and status above all else. I was taught that those things defined a person's worth. But you," he trailed off, the hint of a rueful smile touching his lips. "You've shown me just how misguided I've been." Darlene felt a mixture of surprise and empathy. Seeing Everett like this, stripped of his usual arrogance, was something she hadn't anticipated. She sensed that his words were sincere, that he was finally confronting the ideals that had ruled his life. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Shaw," she replied gently. "Sometimes it takes a moment of humility to see what really matters." He gave a slight nod, his expression shifting to something more solemn. "I realize now that I've missed out on understanding the people around me. And in doing so, I missed out on understanding myself. I've spent my life building walls, believing they would protect me. But those walls only kept me isolated, disconnected from everyone." Darlene sensed the weight of his words. The struggle within him as he tried to reconcile his past actions with the man he wanted to become. She knew that this revelation hadn't come easily for him, that it had cost him a piece of the pride he'd once held so dearly. "Growth is never easy," she said softly, "but it's never too late to change." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Thank you, Darlene. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to learn from it, to be better." Darlene offered a small smile. "That's all anyone can ask, Mr. Shaw." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them replaced by a quiet understanding. She could see the faint glimmer of remorse in his eyes, a reminder that even the proudest among them were capable of humility. As Everett turned to leave, he paused, glancing back at her with a trace of the old warmth he'd kept hidden for so long. "Congratulations, Darlene. You deserve every happiness." She nodded, her heart light. "Thank you, Mr. Shaw," when he left. Darlene felt a wave of relief, a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. His words were not only an apology, but an acknowledgement of her strength, her resilience, and her worth. She had claimed her dignity, and now, she had his respect as well. That evening, she met Grant for dinner, her heart brimming with happiness as she shared the details of her conversation with Everett. Grant listened with quiet pride, his hand warm over hers as she recounted the moment. "Darlene," he said, his gaze soft, "you've changed more than just Everett's perspective. You've transformed your entire world." She smiled, feeling the truth of his words. "It feels like a new beginning, like I'm finally free." Grant nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've always had that power, Darlene. I've just been lucky enough to see it unfold." They spent the evening talking, each story, each laugh strengthening their bond. Darlene felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the life they were building together was rooted in honesty, in respect, and in a love that saw beyond titles or wealth. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not just by Grant, but by everyone around her. As they walked home under the soft glow of the city lights, Grant pulled her close, his voice a quiet murmur in the night. "Are you ready for what's next?" "Darlene, for the future we're going to build." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with joy. "More than ready, Grant." In that moment, the world felt boundless, filled with the promise of new adventures and dreams waiting to be realized. She was no longer the invisible woman in Everett Shaw's mansion, no longer bound by the limitations others had tried to impose. She was Darlene, a woman of strength and dignity, ready to embrace whatever came next. And with Grant by her side, she knew that this was just the beginning. Darlene stood before the mansion for the last time, taking in the grandeur of the place she had once called her workplace. It was strange to think that just months ago, she had moved through these halls quietly, almost as if she didn't exist. Now, as she prepared to leave for the final time, she felt a powerful sense of accomplishment. She was no longer the invisible woman who blended into the background. Today, she was walking away with her head held high, ready to begin a new chapter. She had come to say goodbye to her colleagues, many of whom had gathered to wish her well. The familiar faces were warm and full of genuine admiration, and for the first time, Darlene felt like she was leaving behind more than just a job. She was leaving behind a legacy of resilience, of kindness, and of quiet strength. As she moved through the hallways one last time, her thoughts drifted to Everett. Despite their complicated past, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. His indifference, his disregard, those things had once been painful, but they had also made her stronger, had pushed her to claim her worth. And in the end, he had come to respect her. The man who had once looked at her with disdain had, in his own way, come to admire her courage. Before leaving, she decided to stop by his office. She knocked gently, half expecting him to be out, but he opened the door, his expression a mixture of surprise and something softer. "Darlene," he greeted, his tone warmer than it had ever been. "I heard you were leaving today." She nodded, offering him a small smile. "Yes, Mr. Shaw. I just wanted to thank you for everything. I know it wasn't always easy, but I think we both learned something important." He gave a slight nod, his gaze thoughtful. "You've certainly taught me more than I expected," he admitted. "I think you'll do great things, Darlene." The words held a sincerity that touched her. "Thank you. I hope you find the same." With that, she turned to leave, feeling a sense of closure that she hadn't anticipated. She was ready to move on, to embrace the life that lay before her. Outside, Grant waited by his car, his smile broad as he saw her approach. He opened the door for her, his eyes filled with pride as she settled into the seat beside him. "All done?" he asked, his tone gentle. She nodded, looking back at the mansion one last time. "Yes, I'm ready." They drove in comfortable silence, the cityscape unfolding around them as they left the neighborhood behind. The air was fresh, filled with the promise of new beginnings, and Darlene felt a surge of excitement for the future they were about to create together. Grant glanced over at her, his hand reaching to hold hers. "You know, Darlene, this is just the beginning. There's so much waiting for us, so many dreams to chase." She smiled, her heart full. "I know, and I can't wait to see where we end up." In the months that followed, Darlene and Grant began building their life together. They traveled, explored new places, and embraced every adventure with open hearts. With each day, Darlene felt herself growing, shedding the layers of self-doubt that had once held her back. But the most fulfilling part of their journey was the foundation they built together, a nonprofit that supported underprivileged individuals looking to improve their lives. It was a project close to Darlene's heart, a way to give back to the community and help others find their own strength. As the organization grew, so did her impact. She became a respected figure in her own right, known not just as Grant's partner, but as a woman of strength, a woman who had overcome hardship to find her place in the world. One evening, as they prepared to host an event for the foundation, Darlene stood before the mirror, adjusting her dress. Grant entered the room, his eyes warm as he watched her. "You look beautiful," he murmured, slipping his arms around her waist. She leaned into him, a smile touching her lips. "Thank you, Grant, for everything." He brushed a kiss to her temple, his voice soft. "Darlene, you've given me more than I could ever give you. Together, we've built something that matters. You should be proud." She turned to face him, her eyes bright. "I am, and I'm grateful that we get to do this together," as they walked out to greet their guests. Darlene felt a profound sense of purpose, a feeling that every step of her journey had led her to this moment. She was no longer the girl who had once been invisible, overlooked and underestimated. She was a woman who had claimed her place in the world, who had found love, purpose, and the courage to embrace her future. With Grant by her side and the life they had created together, she knew that her story was far from over. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love,